Hello. We are at a public park today. I'm at the back of it. We may have some interruptions, some people, may be able to hear some people off in the distance. We'll see how it goes. So here we are with our forest folklore, our wonderful book. And I am so excited. We are at chapter 5, Trees. And this chapter is well over 100 pages, but there are many sections regarding different types of trees, all kinds of different things, the worship of trees, trees as the origin, the shadow of trees, trees preside over marriages, so many different parts. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with trees in general. So, the remark of Ruskin, what a great thought of God was that when he thought a tree, epitomizes the tree in all its various aspects, considering its utility from every point of view, whether as contributing to the shelter of mankind by its timber or by its foliage, from the bitter blasts or from the torrid heat, or ministering to his aesthetic emotions by the beauty of the leaves and flowers, or providing for his sustenance by the luscious fruits and nourishing juices. The ancient Greeks called the oak the mother tree, because their mythology avers that after Jupiter had slain the giants, the oak sprang up from the body of one of them, called Rhoecus. I'll show you that word. This tree the Greeks looked upon as the first tree which grew upon earth, and which provided nourishment to men by its acorns. According to Galen, the Arcadians continued to feed on acorns when all the Greeks were using cereals. In fact, primitive man seems to have nourished himself largely on acorns and nuts of various kinds, which diet was in no way detrimental to him, as they being fed with the oaken mast, the aged trees themselves in age surpassed. To the imagination of early man, a tree, being the largest of plants, must have presented a marvelous and bewildering aspect. In some countries, he would see it bare and withered, looking during winter. Sorry about that. I'm going to say that again. In some countries, he would see it bare and withered looking during winter. But as soon as the first breath of spring was wafted over the land, a wondrous transformation would commence. Gradually, the leaves would unfold, day after day, becoming larger and of a more vivid green, until in the height of summer, a verdant canopy would overshadow all the forest, and man in his nakedness would feel grateful for the welcome shade afforded from the overpowering rays of the sun. To the tree, this would assign a supernatural intelligence, and would regard it as a sentient being. As the summer wore on and the autumn days drew nigh, the kaleidoscope changes in the leaf coloring would anew rivet his attention. And as the days passed, the fall of the leaves would fill him with a presentiment of evil, which would be realized by the trees becoming again bare and apparently lifeless, leaving him shelterless against the biting blasts of winter. As year after year passed with the same continual changefulness, trees, or perhaps one outstanding tree, on account of its size and age, would come to be regarded with an especial reverence, and primitive imagination would people it with all sorts of beings, such as gods, nymphs, and demons. A curious fact found among the Khasya tribe of eastern Bengal is that the words meaning tree and house are practically the same, which would appear to indicate that in primeval times the ancestors of that tribe had their habitations in hollow trees. In this prosaic age, too little is thought about trees and the romance connected with them. Their sweet music as the summer breezes play gently through their foliage gives a certain peace to existence to the loiterers among the woodlands, and to the imaginative mind the tree appears to have many moods which one can understand and sympathize with. As Dr. Quito remarked, the tree seems to have stood among and to have witnessed the ever-changing panorama of human life, and we know that it has been itself an object of notice, and has ministered some pleasure in past ages to eyes long quenched in dust. Writers in all ages have used trees by way of illustration, and Homer frequently embellishes his subjects with references to them. In the poems of Ossian, and following beautiful passage occurs in Malvina's lamentation for Oscar. The passage goes, "I was a lovely tree in thy presence, Oscar, with all my branches round me. But thy death came like a blast from the desert, and laid my green head low. The spring returned with its showers, but no green leaf of mine arose. Again, when old and weary, blind and almost destitute of friends, Ossian compares himself to a tree that is withered and decayed. But Ossian is a tree that is withered. Its branches are blasted and bare. No green leaf covers its boughs. From its trunk no young shoot is seen to spring. The breeze whistles in its grey moss. The blast shakes its head of age. The storm will soon overturn it, and strew all its dry branches with thee, O Dermid, and with all the rest of the mighty dead in the green winding vale of Kona." In very remote conceptions of mythology, there appears to have been no distinction drawn between the trees growing on the earth and those which imagination conceived as growing in the sky. As soon, however, as the ambrosia, the divine life-giving fluid, fell upon the earth, the trees there took on a different character from the sky trees, and seeded and multiplied. But since that time, unlike the latter, their life, like the life of man, has been limited in duration. The ancient Persians considered the tree to be the emblem of human existence, owing to the changes which it undergoes during the various seasons, and it was also regarded as a type of immortality, owing to its lengthened period of life. A number of venerable and umbrageous trees were believed to be inhabited by celestial spirits. These were looked upon as peculiarly sacred trees. And the great spirit Ormuzd, speaking to Zoroaster, said, "Go, O Zoroaster, to the living trees, and let thy mouth speak before them these words. I pray to the pure trees, the creatures of Ormuzd." The Magians were obliged by the precepts of their religion to cultivate the soil, and they considered it a most meritorious act to plant a tree. A tree has often been conceived of as a kind of republic or an agglomeration of isolated beings, and de Candolle opined the forest giants to be so many aggregates of individuals, or buds, annually succeeding on the stem which represents a living soul. An analogy has been drawn between coral and a tree. The coral insect constructing the coral branches in a somewhat similar way to the individuals of the tree constructing the boughs. This is not so far-fetched as might appear when we remember that each leaf may be looked upon as a separate being possessing mouths for respiration, and so helping to nourish the whole bulk of the tree. Edward Gibbon speaks of the city of Rome under the allegory of a tree. He says, "Amidst the arms of the Lombards, and under the despotism of the Greeks, we again inquire into the fate of Rome, which had reached, about the close of the 6th century, the lowest period of her depression. By the removal of the seat of empire and the successive loss of the provinces, the sources of public and private opulence were exhausted. The lofty tree under whose shade the nations of the earth had reposed was deprived of its leaves and branches, and the sapless trunk was left to wither on the ground. The primitive races of mankind believed that trees possessed souls, and Captain Cook said that the natives of Tahiti believe that the souls of trees at death ascend to the divinity with whom they at first mix, and thereafter each one passes into the particular mansion allotted to it. The ancient Greek philosophers also attributed intellect and sense to trees. Naturally, when a soul was given to a tree, it was likewise endowed with the power of speech. This speech is often in a mysterious, emblematical, or silent language, which, however, often makes itself heard. It may be in the creaking of the branches or in the leaf rustling in the breeze. Many trees have even taken human speech, as the cornel tree, in which Polydorus spoke, or in the juniper tree mentioned by the author of the 17th century, named Locenius, which was indignant and cried out when it was pulled up. In Burma, the temples were surrounded with trees because the first holy men dwelt in the forest and worshipped under the shade of the trees. And thus, each succeeding incarnation of the Buddha had a connection with some particular tree. The Scandinavian god Odin had human victims regularly offered to him, and these were put to death by being hung on a tree and stabbed with a spear. One of his titles was God of the Hanged, or Lord of the Gallows, and the Hamaval tells how, when young, he was sacrificed to himself in the same way, and represents him as saying, "I know that I hung on the windy tree for 9 whole nights, wounded with the spear, dedicated to Odin, myself to myself." His mysterious wisdom came to him during the period of this ordeal. In some countries, it is believed that trees suffer from the evil eye as well as men, so much so that if one looks with evil intent upon a tree, that tree is considered to be cursed. Professor de Gubernatus mentions several instances of this. He says that several trees are indebted for their evil reputation to the curse of some divine personage, and many were cursed by the Virgin Mary during the flight into Egypt. A Bulgarian song mentions the cursing of 3 trees by her, and adds that she afterwards went to a convent and there confessed her outburst of temper. In India, if a native marries a widow, as this kind of union is usually attended by fatal consequences, he hurls his curse on an expiatory tree, which absorbs all the future evils, and at the same time perishes. Schweinfurth, during his travels in Central Africa, found this superstition prevalent among the Nubians, and tells how the inhabitants of a certain village showed him the branch of a colossal tree, Ficus lutea, which had fallen simply because a warrior, in passing it, had cast on it the evil eye. There was a belief once current in Ireland that if one confides a dream he has had to a tree, that tree at once loses its leaves and withers, and this because dreams were considered to be the work of the devil. And now we are going to read the section, Shadow of Trees. There was a curious early primitive belief that a tree could be injured through its shadow, which was considered to be sensitive. Dudley Kidd tells us that if a Kaffir witch doctor required the leaves of a tree for his bruise, as the shadow of the tree will feel the touch of his feet, he takes care to run up quickly and avoid touching the shadow, lest it should inform the tree of the danger, and so give the tree time to withdraw the medicinal properties from its extremities into the safety of its inaccessible trunk. A myth among some East African tribes has a strong resemblance to the story of the Tower of Babel, only in this case men wished to reach the moon, and sought to accomplish their object by placing one tree on top of the other, until the whole fell down. In Nigeria, a human victim, usually a leper, was always offered to Obumu, the god of thunder. The victim was first wrapped in palm leaves, and was then tied to the top of a high tree. To trees and parts of trees have been attributed many marvels. It is narrated in the travels of Gaspar Balbi to India in 1582 that the sea threw up on the shore an enormous tree. When it was measured, it was found that its length was precisely that which was required for the pillars of the church, which was being constructed in honor of St. John the Baptist. When a Maori of New Zealand desired a tree for the purpose of making a canoe, he would select his tree and cut a strip of bark from off it. The tree then became taboo, and no one would so much as touch it. Should a West African tribe of the Ashira tribe intend going on a trading expedition, he first rubs himself all over with the juice of the alumi tree, which he believes will render him very acute at driving the best bargain. An episode similar to the concealment of King Charles II in the Royal Oak is recorded of one of the kings of Texcoco in Mexico, when in the year 1418 the Tezpanecs killed the king of the Texcocans, his son and heir. The young prince, Nezahualcoyotl, who was then 15 years of age, saw his father murdered before his eyes. He himself was concealed among the friendly branches of a tree which overshadowed the spot. When Cortes took possession of Tabasco, he gave 3 cuts with his sword on a large ceiba tree, which grew in the place, and proclaimed aloud that he took possession of the city in the name and on behalf of the Catholic sovereigns, and would maintain and defend the same with sword and buckler against all who should gainsay it. And the next section is trees as the origin of mankind. The origin of mankind from plants seems to be a myth of ancient Aryan origin, and Hesiod, when treating of the ages of the world, speaks of 5 succeeding races of mankind, and he tells that the third, or brazen race of men, were formed by Zeus out of ash trees. This race, he says, delighted in war, although they ate no corn, yet they had prodigious strength, while all things they used were composed of brass, for black iron was not yet. Their end was their slaughter by each other, and leaving no fame behind them, they went down to the mouldy house of cold AIDS. AIDS. I'm not sure how to say that word. Virgil, speaking of King Evander, the founder of the Roman glory, causes him to say, "These groves the native fauns and nymphs possessed, and a race of men sprung from the trunks of trees and stubborn oak, who had neither laws nor refinement, knew neither to yoke the steer, nor to gather the wealth, nor to use their acquisitions with moderation. But the branches and hunting, a rough source of sustenance, supplied them with food." In Italy, it is said that a man comes from seppo, i.e. trunk, stump, etc., or from stipedi, a stem. In the Phrygian cosmogony, according to Pausanias, an almond tree was considered as the father of all things, probably from its lilac blossoms appearing before the leaves, and thus being the earliest heralds of the spring. Almost all the Semitic and Aryan races inherit the tradition of mankind having originated from a tree, and Schobel, conjecturing the probable origin of this belief, wrote in Le Mythe de la Femme et du Serpent that in the tree man saw such a resemblance to himself that he thought he had come from the earth like and under the form of a tree. The prophet Isaiah allegorically depicted human beings as trees when he wrote that out of the stem of Jesse should come forth a rod, and from its roots a branch. And this gave rise to an artistic myth which depicted the Virgin Mary coming out from the waist of a tree which was planted in the navel of the personage who was the founder of the family. And sometimes she is compared to a flowering stem from paradise. Many of the ancient races conceived the clouds as being parts of a mighty universal tree, and as from clouds descended the rain, the ambrosia, or the life-giving fluid, vegetation became looked upon as symbolical of life and generation. Thus man, in course of time, connected his origin with these cloud trees, which became materialized into actual trees. Scandinavian mythology tells how the dwarfs fashioned two figures out of trees. These figures were found by Odin and his brothers, who endowed them with life and understanding. They named them Askir and Embla, and they were the first human beings. I'll show you the words for that. Among the Scandinavian races, the goddess Holda, who combined the form of a lovely woman with the trunk of a tree, was believed to have been the creator of mankind. And legend of Hesse describes her as being a beautiful woman in front, while behind she resembles a hollow tree. The oak and the ash have both been looked upon as progenitors of mankind. The Greeks had a tradition that a mighty cosmogonic or cloud ash produced the first race of men through the Malayi or nymphs of the ash, who were regarded as cloud goddesses. They also looked upon the oak as having produced the first men, and oak trees were called the first mothers. The Romans also shared this belief, and Juvenal, in his 6th satire, speaks of mankind as born of the opening oak, which, mother-like, fed man with her own acorns, while Ovid says that man's first food was acorns dropping from the tree of Jove. Even yet, in some parts of Germany, the belief is current, especially among children, that babies are brought by the doctor from out some ancient hollow tree or stump. The genealogical tree is said to commemorate the descent of man from the trunk of a tree, and Dante imagined the human family under the form of this tree. The Persian or Iranian tradition of the creation of man is that originally the first human pair grew up as a double tree with the fingers of each folded over the ears of the other. When this tradition had attained maturity, it was separated into two by the decree of Ormuzd, who endowed each half with a separate existence and a human soul as a man and a woman with the gift of knowledge. Some Indian tribes believe that men originated from trees. Thus, M. Rousselet, speaking of the cassia tree, known in India under the name of Moa, as supplying all the native wants, says, "We are therefore not surprised to learn that in the Windhas and Aravallis, the inhabitants look upon it as equal to the divinity. It is from it that the Gauns, Bills, Mehers, and Maneo derive their existence." Regarding this ancient belief in the human race having been originally descended from trees, there is a tale found throughout Asia of 4 travelers who spent a night in a forest and agreed that one of them should keep watch by turns while the others slept. The first one who kept watch was a carpenter, and to while away the time, he carved out the shape of a beautiful woman from the trunk of a tree lying near at hand. When the second, a tailor, saw the figure, he clothed it. The third, when his turn came, became a jeweler, decked out the image with jewels. The fourth was a holy man, and he was so impressed by the sight of the lovely image that he invoked all his magic powers and endowed the image with life. When the rest awoke, each claimed the lovely being as his wife, because they had all had a hand in shaping her. The dispute waxed furious, and the authorities of the neighboring village were appealed to solve the problem as to which of the 4 the hand of the disputed bride should belong. This they were unable to do, and finally the case was submitted to a higher court. The whole court went out to the cemetery, where prayers were offered for a decision from on high. During this time, the woman was leaning against a tree when suddenly it opened, and the woman entering it was seen no more. As she vanished, a voice from the heavens was heard saying, "To its original shall every created thing return." A central Indian race called the Khattis believe that they originated in the following manner. At the time when the 5 sons of Pandau, the heroes of whom the Mahabharata has sung the exploits, were reduced to being simply guardians of their cattle. Karna, their illegitimate brother, thought he would deprive them of this last resource. Recognizing that he would be unable to employ the warriors, that is, the nobles, in such a dishonorable enterprise, Karna struck the earth with his wand. The wand opened immediately, and from it came a man called Kat, a word meaning engendered from wood. Karna employed him in the theft of the cattle by guaranteeing in the name of the gods that a similar action would never be considered as a crime, either in him or in any of his descendants. On account of this accommodating tradition, the Khattis always bless the memory of Karna. The Kabyles of North Africa believe that the men who lead the tribes are formed from the ash tree. Mayer tells us that the Aborigines of Encounter Bay in Australia say that the first man was formed from the gum of a wattle tree. He then entered into a young woman and was properly born. This belief is also found widespread in America, where trees were worshipped as the emblem of life. A myth of the Yurucases of Bolivia relates that when all mankind had been destroyed by fire, the god Tiri opened a tree and from it drew forth all the various tribes. When a sufficient number had come forth, he closed up the tree. But these people were weak and ignorant, so a virgin prayed to Ula, who was the most beautiful tree of the forest, or rather, the tree contained Ula, who came forth and embraced the virgin, and from their union, the culture hero sprang, who taught the people the arts of life. The Quiches of Central America had certain divine beings whom they called givers of life. These first made men from clay, who, however, were weak and watery, and they were destroyed by water. They next made men from wood and women from the pith of trees. These peopled the earth with wooden mannequins, but this race, being still considered unsatisfactory, was destroyed. Some other experimental races were made, until finally men were formed from white and yellow maize, and these were the progenitors of the present races of mankind. In the legends of the Peccary Caribs of the Antilles and the West Indies, the mythical twin heroes Carrie and Cain brought the original animals from the hollow trunk of a tree. A North American legend or epic tells the adventures of a mythical being called Kulaskap or Glooskap, who on one occasion took his bow and arrows and shot at an ash tree. From the hole made by the arrowmen came forth the first of the human race. Among the South American tribes of Guyana, among the South American tribes of Guyana, a great creator is acknowledged. They say that all created things came from a branch of a silk cotton tree, which had been cut down by the Creator, but that the white man had sprung from the chips of a particularly useless tree. Another belief was that all plants grew from one tree, in the center of which was a huge pool of water inhabited by fish. A reminiscence of the deluge is that a monkey let loose this water, which thus drowned the world. The classical myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who repeopled the earth by throwing stones behind them, finds its counterpart among the Tamanka tribes of the Orinoco, who say that the only survivors of the deluge, a man and a woman, repopulated the world by throwing the stones of the Ida palm, Mauritia, over their heads, which at once became human beings. And now we are at the section, Worship of Trees. If, as might be said, man's first ideal was the life of the tree, naturally his worship would be that of the tree. And in many countries, trees were held in the utmost reverence, which, in some cases, has survived down to the present day. Modern research has thrown much new light on the mythological origin of tree gods and tree spirits, more particularly as regards the mythology of ancient Greece. Professor Rendell Harris marks that the gods of Olympos are fading away into the earlier forms from which they were evolved. The most primitive and simple of religious beliefs among both northern and southern races connected the object with the divinity, and when the ancients declared the oak sacred to Zeus, they identified the tree with the god. In other words, the tree itself was the god, and in very primitive times was worshipped as such. This hypothesis is still further elaborated by the fact that the oak is the tree which most often struck by lightning, and thus Zeus, being also the god of thunder, or the thunder itself, dwelt in, or rather had his being in, an oak tree. Professor Harris puts it thus. The thunder god goes back into the thunder man, or the thunder bird, or thunder tree. Zeus takes the stately form and vegetable life of the oak tree. Or, if he must be flesh and blood, he comes back as a red-headed woodpecker. The parasites of the oak, such as mistletoe and ivy, would evidently partake of the attributes of the tree, and would thus be the thunder also. In the case of the ivy, a new and subordinate thunder god would become evolved under the name of Dionysus. And Professor Harris says Dionysus is the ivy. In the first instance, he is ivy, nothing more or less. And again, the tree is the thunder, and makes all its parasites and its denizens thunder also. The god of thunder among the Finns was Ukko, or Oak, and the mountain Asher Rowan, under the name of Rani, was considered to be his wife. The red berries of this tree were very sacred, and apparently it was on account of them that the tree derived its sanctity, as the following passage from the Kalevala would indicate. In the yard that grows a rowan, thou with reverend care shouldst tend it. Holy is the tree there growing, holy likewise are its branches. On its boughs the leaves are holy, and its berries yet more holy. From the redness of its berries it was known as Thor's tree. When Christianity began to take a hold on the nations, the priests endeavored to do away with this ancient worship of trees, looking upon it as a diabolical invention. It was, however, so deeply ingrained in the human heart that in many cases it was utilized by the church for its own ends. By blessing the most ancient and venerated trees, and by erecting Christian altars and placing crucifixes and images of the Virgin near to those trees, under which in ancient times the people had sacrificed to the heathen divinities. It is related of St. Martin that he once demolished a temple unopposed, but when he endeavored to cut down a sacred fir tree near it, the people prevented him. Round the cross itself, a legend was woven by which it was recognized to have been formed from a tree lineally descended from the tree of Adam. Among the Jews, tree worship appears to have been pretty widespread at one time. The Asherah, to which frequent reference is made in the Old Testament, was often simply a grove, but frequently it was an image such as an artificial tree, and as such is often seen as Assyrian inscriptions or sculptures, tree worship having been very common in Assyria. The worship of the Asherah seems to have been entirely local, and the prophets protested vehemently against it. At Temnos, Aphrodite was worshipped in the shape of a growing myrtle tree, which might be considered as an image. Dr. James Ferguson mentions a curious instance of tree worship in India, which he had witnessed himself. He says, "While residing in Thassur, I observed at one time considerable crowds passing near the factory I then had charge of. As it might be merely an ordinary affair they were going to attend, I took no notice. But as the crowd grew daily larger and assumed a more religious character, I inquired, and was told that a god had appeared in a tree at a place about 6 miles off. Next morning, I rode over and found a large space cleared in a village I knew well, in the center of which stood an old decayed date tree, hung with garlands and offerings. Around it houses were erected for the attendant Brahmins, and a great deal of business was going on in offerings and puja. On my inquiring how the god manifested his presence, I was informed that soon after the sun rose in the morning, the tree raised its head to welcome him, and bowed it down again when he departed. As this was a miracle easily tested, I returned at noon and found it was so. I just lost my spot. I was trying to shoo away a little hornet that was after me, but I found my spot again, so here I go. After a little study and investigation, the mystery did not seem difficult of explanation. The tree had originally grown across the principal pathway through the village, but at last hung so low that in order to enable people to pass under it, it had been turned aside and fastened parallel to the road. In the operation, the bundle of fibers which composed the root had become twisted like the strands of a rope. When the morning sun struck on the upper surface of these, they contracted in drying, and hence a tendency to untwist, which raised the head of the tree. With the evening dews they relaxed, and the head of the tree declined, thus proving to the man of science, as to the credulous Hindu, that it was due to the direct action of the sun god. The mysterious processes connected with the life and growth of trees, from the tiny seedlings developing in the course of centuries into the hoary giants of the forests, led primitive man to believe these trees with all kinds of supernatural beings, and even, as already said, to endow them with separate souls of their own. And this belief, with various modifications, was found in all countries. In many parts of the Egyptian desert, and at a considerable distance from the Nile, may be seen sycamore fig trees, Ficus sycamoris, of luxuriant growth, green and flourishing among the sand. The truth is that the water of the river has infiltrated through to them, and it may be said that they stand with their feet on the river, though apparently far removed from it. These trees are considered to be divine and to be animated by the goddesses within them. These goddesses or spirits sometimes manifest themselves, and Professor Maspero says that at such times the head or even the whole body would emerge from the trunk of the tree, after a time re-entering it, being reabsorbed, or as the Egyptian expression has it, the trunk ate it again. The chief goddesses who dwelt in these trees were Hathor, Naut, Selkit, and Nit, as well as other less important divinities. These thus shrouded their divinity in trees, and so became tree goddesses. Many of these trees yield a fluid which in some instances is limpid and in others milk-like. It was thus believed that these divinities provided nourishment and refreshment for their devotees on earth, and many of the ancient Egyptian monuments depict the goddess as bending over the earth, pouring out the water of the Nile from a vase, which represents the annual inundation, and milk issuing from one of her breasts. The sycamore fig is one of those trees which produces a milky fluid. It was from it, in this case clearly a mythical tree, that the goddess provided sustenance for man. The ancient Egyptians believed that the souls of the dead had a long and arduous journey before they reached the islands of the blessed. The Book of the Dead gave them full instructions, which, if they obeyed them to the letter, enabled them to reach the goal without fail. Professor Maspero, describing the journey of the soul, says, "On leaving the tomb, he turned his back on the valley, and staff in hand climbed the hills which bounded it on the west, plunging boldly into the desert, where some bird, or even a kindly insect, such as a praying mantis, a grasshopper, or a butterfly, served as his guide. Soon he came to one of the sycamores which grow in the sand far away from the Nile, and are accounted magic trees by the fellahin. Out of the foliage a goddess, Nuit, Hathor, or Nit, half emerged and offered him a dish of fruit, loaves of bread, and jar of water. By accepting these gifts he becomes the guest of the goddess, and could never more retrace his steps without special permission. Beyond the sycamore were lands of terror, infested by serpents and ferocious beasts, intersected by ponds and marshes where gigantic monkeys cast their nets. Having successfully eluded all these and other perils, he at last reached the islands of the blessed, where perpetual bliss was his lot. In some instances, the original form of the tree spirit was the actual tree, and this may have been the idea of the Karak Indians of California. Mr. S. Powers mentions that when an Indian has occasion to cut branches from off a sacred tree, he takes care to leave the topmost branches and 2 side branches, causing them to resemble a man's head with 2 outstretched arms. He is usually in great distress when cutting the wood and weeps copiously, but cannot say for what reason, unless it be that by his grief he hopes to mitigate the wrath of the spirit of those of whose branches he has cut off. The god of vegetation under the different name of Adonis, in Syria, Attis in Phrygia, and Osiris in Egypt, was considered to be a tree spirit, and as such was charged with the duty of watching over the crops, stimulating their growth, and averting all evil influences from them until they attained to maturity. The mythological conceptions of this god under these 3 names are embodied in the legend which narrates how the god is destroyed by the boar or the bear of winter and is resurrected with the breath of spring. In the very early days of Egypt, Osiris was undoubtedly a tree spirit, and, as the legend says, his dead body was enclosed in a tree. Many of the ancient Egyptian monuments, particularly some in the Hall of Osiris at Dendera, depict it so. Dr. J.G. Fraser mentions a ceremony showing Osiris in this character as described by Firmicus Maternus, De Aurora Profanarum Religionum. This states that a pine tree was cut down and the center hollowed out. An image of Osiris was made from this wood, which was then buried like a corpse in the hollow of the tree. Dr. Fraser observes that it is hard to imagine how the conception of a tree as tenanted by a personal being could be more plainly expressed, and adds that this image was kept for a year and then burned, as was similarly done in Phrygia, with an image of Attis attached to a pine tree. I'm going to show you this word. At Gerbalge in Dalmatia, spirits inhabited only certain particular trees, and if one of these trees were felled, the perpetrator of the deed either died on the spot or became an invalid for the rest of his life. There was a plane tree at Bithynia, which was said to have grown from the tomb of Amycus, and his spirit had entered into it. He is said to have been one who fought with all strangers, and it was believed that if any part of this tree was such as a bough, was taken on board a ship, constant quarreling ensued until his malign influence was got rid of by throwing the branch away. This bears a close resemblance to the legend of the piece of oak from the grove of Dodona, placed by Minerva in the prow of the Argo. A similar tale is mentioned by Mr. W.R.S. Ralston. He says there is a Czech story of a nymph who appeared by day among men, but always went back to her willow by night. She married a mortal, bore him children, and lived happily with him, till at length he cut down her willow tree. That moment his wife died. Out of the willow was made a cradle, which had the power of instantly lulling to sleep the babe she had left behind her. And when the babe became a child, it was able to hold converse with its dead mother by means of a pipe cut from the twigs grown on the stump which had once been that mother's home. In Croatia, witches were formerly buried under old trees in the forest, and it was believed that their souls passed into these trees. In some districts of Austria, forest trees are said to have souls and to feel injuries done to them. Up to little over a century ago, the Esthonians reverenced certain holy trees in the island of Dago, and under them sacrifices were offered on St. George's Day for the well-being of their horses. No one ventured to break a bough, and even the fallen boughs were left to decay on the ground. Among the Samoyedas of Siberia, Any curiously contorted tree was adopted as an idol and worshipped as containing a divinity. Throughout Africa, the belief in spirits is universal. In Nigeria, many trees are said to be inhabited by the spirits of the dead, and Mr. C.H. Partridge says that in every village of the Ndem tribe, there is a large tree into which the souls of the villagers enter at death. These trees are held to be sacred and are not cut down. Mr. Partridge also mentions that this big tree is considered by the natives of other villages to be their life, and if anyone enters it, he will become ill, or may even die, unless he pays a fine to the chief. Some Abyssinian tribes believe that a tree groans while it is being felled, implying that a curse will rest upon the woodman. Consequently, he endeavors to explain to the tree that it was not he, but an elephant or a rhinoceros which caused it to fall. Sometimes the tree is considered to be the god himself, as for instance the tree Walichu. In the religious system of Dahomey, the second most important gods, the first being serpents, are considered to be tall and beautiful trees, the most revered of these being the cotton tree and the poison tree. Prayers are offered up to those trees, especially in times of sickness, and offerings are made to them. The cotton tree is also referred to as Bombax. The Aboriginal races of India, the Kolarians and the Dravidians, worshipped spirits, particularly the spirits of their ancestors and demons. Each family had its tutelary spirit, and these were supposed to dwell in very large and ancient trees. On the outskirts of almost every village may be seen a gigantic tree which is regarded not only as a temple or shrine, but as the center of the village life as far as its widespread shade extends. Sacrifices are offered to the resident spirits of these trees, and votive offerings are hung on the branches. These trees appear to have been a survival of the ancient practice of the Kolarians of leaving one solitary tree standing as a refuge for the dispossessed spirits when clearings were made in the jungle. Mr. W. W. Hunter tells us that the whole of the inhabitants of the capital of Birboom go once a year to a certain shrine in the jungle where a ghost dwells in a bella tree. The shrine consists of 3 trees, the bella tree, a kachmula tree, and a sara tree. Mr. Hunter adds that, though these trees are only about 70 years old, the shrine is said to be of the greatest antiquity. And tradition alleges that the 3 trees never grow thicker or taller, but remain the same forever. In the northwest of India, the chili tree, Juniperus excelsa, was the abode of a tree spirit who caused women to bear children and flocks and herds to multiply. It is believed among the Tibetans that whenever a lama is born, all withered trees and other plants surrounding his birthplace put forth green leaves, this being the sign that a holy child is born. Minher J.J.M. de Groot, in his work on the religious system of China, says that in China the tree spirits are usually shaped like human beings or appear in the likeness of bulls, serpents, or other creatures. He tells how sometimes when a tree is being felled, the tree spirit has been seen to rush out in the semblance of a blue bull, and adds that even yet the Chinese belief in dangerous tree spirits is very strong. In southern Fujian, people are deterred from felling large trees or cutting off heavy branches, lest the spirit of the tree become angry and cause disease and other calamities. The green banyan, or qing, which is the largest tree found in that district of China, is particularly respected. In Amoy, there is a strong aversion to planting trees, because it is thought that as soon as the stems are as thick as a man's neck, the planter will probably be throttled by the indwelling spirit. Minher de Groot thinks that this may account for the almost total neglect of forestry in that part of China. Some of the tribes of Borneo, in common with other races when they are making clearings in the forest, leave a few trees standing so that the ejected spirits may have some places in which they can take refuge. The Dayaks will never cut down an old tree, as they attribute souls to the tree. And in like manner, the Buddhists of Siam refuse to break even the branch of a tree, as they believe that everything possesses a soul. And Tassim tree, Antiaris toxicaria of central Borneo, is believed to possess a soul. There is the poison tree, this is the poison tree with the juice of which arrows are poisoned. Its spirit is very fractious, but if suitable offerings are made to it, it shows its pleasure by endowing the wood with a particularly pleasant perfume. In many countries, trees are supposed to utter cries of pain and even to bleed when they are cut down or wounded in any way, and in some cases, the chief of the tribe and his family die as the result of such a sacrilege. William Ellis relates how a great gambler, Kanekama by name, had, in the reign of Kamarau, a king of ancient days, staked and lost all he possessed, except one pig, which, being dedicated to his god, he durst on no account stake. That night he dreamed that his god appeared to him and told him to stake his pig next day, when he would be successful. He did so and dedicated a great part of his gains to his god. That night in his dreams the god appeared again to him and told him to tell the king that a clump of trees would be found growing in a particular spot, and that if he cut down one of them and made an image of it, he, the god, would reside in the image and impart his power to it, and that Kanekama should be his priest. The king, hearing of this, sent a number of men to cut down one of the trees of the clump, which clump had been miraculously caused by the gods to grow up in a single night, and into which they entered. The gods gave a sign which tree was to be cut down. When the men were working with their stone axes, chips of wood, striking one or two of them, killed them instantly. This terrified the others, and they ceased to work. Kanekama, however, persuaded them to resume their labors, which they did, first covering themselves with native cloth and the leaves of the tai plant, and instead of axes they used their long daggers, or pahoas, with which they also carved out the image. From that circumstance the idol obtained the name of Karai Pahoa, meaning dagger cut or carved. The carving was very curious. The arms of the idol were extended with the fingers spread out, the head was covered with human hair, and the large mouth was armed with rows of shark's teeth. The wood of the tree was very poisonous, and it was said that anyone drinking water in which the wood had been steeped would die within 24 hours. Among many nations, not only are trees said to possess souls of their own, but the souls of the dead are believed to take refuge in trees, and so become tree spirits. Mr. H. Ward tells us that on the River Congo it is believed by some of the tribes that a sick man's soul, having left his body, wanders aimlessly about, and it is necessary to capture it and restore it to its owner. This is done by the witch doctor who, after various incantations, announces that he has succeeded in charming the soul into a branch of a tree. This branch is then broken off and conveyed to the side of the sick man, who is placed in an upright position beside it. After further incantations have been performed, the body is then believed to have re-entered its owner's body. A variation of this belief is found in Melanesia, where the spirits or ghosts of ancestors are supposed to be the cause of illnesses, and various methods are adopted to drive them back to their graves, a vicarious sacrifice often being made. Mr. R. H. Codrington mentions that in the island of San Cristobal, this sacrifice takes the shape of a pig or a fish. The natives believe that a malignant demon called Tapia has taken a sick man's soul and imprisoned it within a banyan tree. So some person who is on confidential terms with Tapia offers a pig or a fish to him, saying, "This is for you to eat in place of that man. Eat this, don't kill him." Tapia accepts the offering, releases the soul, and the man recovers. Other similar cases are found in the island of Amboina and the Babar Islands, where a branch of a tree or even a leaf may be the recipient of a man's soul which had been taken by demons, and which, by various incantations, may be restored to its owner. Demons often reside in trees, and in the Roman Catholic countries of Europe, small crucifixes or images of the Virgin Mary may frequently be seen in the forests, either placed on the trunks or suspended from the branches of the trees. Professor de Gubernatis says that these images are thought to drive away from the tree the demons which hide under the bark, but that nevertheless it is to the tree itself which is given sanctity and adoration. Behind them still lies the holy horror, which Lucian breathed in the forests of ancient Gaul, and the demons which are driven away are the ancient gods, the old forces of nature. In Chaldea, evil spirits or genii were much dreaded, especially during the night when the belated traveler was liable to have one pounce out upon him from a hedge or from behind a tree. The gods of Chaldea often inhabited trees among other objects, the tree of Eridu, which pronounced oracles, being one. In a Chaldean legend, the meaning of which is still obscure, is depicted on an intaglio. The scene shows a goddess pursued by a demon with a double face, taking refuge under a tree. The tree bends down as if to protect her, and while the demon is endeavoring to break down the tree, a god comes out from the trunk and hands a stone-headed mace to the goddess with which to protect herself against her foe. Even at the present day in Palestine, the carob tree and the fig tree, or sycamore fig, are believed to be inhabited by devils. The former in particular, as the reddish color of its wood suggests blood. The tamarisk tree, on the other hand, is usually considered to be inhabited by a saint or wele. I'll show you that word, wele. The worship of ancestors is very widespread in some countries, trees or animals being considered as the residences of the ancestral spirits. Thus, several of the tribes of Central Australia believe that the human soul passes through endless reincarnations and that men and women are simply their own ancestors reborn. Between each incarnation, the soul exists in some natural object, in many cases in a tree. In South Australia, the tribe of Dayeri consider some large sacred trees to be transformations of their fathers, and hence they take the utmost care of these trees. In the Philippine Islands, the natives refrain from felling certain large and stately trees, which they consider to be the homes of the spirits of their ancestors. The spirit speaks in the rustling of the leaves, and anyone passing such a tree begs pardon of the spirit for disturbing it. Each village of the Ignorotas in the district of Lepanto has a sacred tree in which the ancestral spirits live, and offerings are made to it. If it is injured, some misfortune falls on the village, but if it were unfortunately cut down, the whole village would perish. In Bontoc, a province of Luzon, large trees are left standing in which the ancestral spirits reside, and these spirits are further honored by food being placed under the trees for their use. The natives of the northwest coast of Papua think that the spirits or souls of their ancestors live in the branches of trees. On these they hang strips of white or red cloth, 7 or a multiple of 7 in number, and also baskets of food as offerings to the spirits. Mrs. Bishop tells that in Korea, the souls of women who die in childbed take up their abode in trees. From time immemorial, the Chinese have planted trees, particularly the cypress and the pine, on graves in order to strengthen the souls of the deceased and save the body from decay. These special trees are considered fuller of vitality than others, are consequently often identified with the spirits of the dead. A sacred tree stands on the entrance of every Mayokia village, and in this tree is believed to reside the soul of the first ancestor of the villagers, which presides over their destinies. We are at page 173, and it is about to start pouring rain. It is a beautiful day, though, and I am shaded under a tree, so yeah, these stories are great. What a beautiful day. I will make another video soon.